The reign of Sadis the Sunmaker was like a high storm, an unstoppable force of destruction that swept the supercontinent of Russia from east to west before dissipating over the western horizon. The Alethi Empire he created was an ephemeral one, collapsing after the death of its founder. For 500 years, the Alethi would thereafter remain a small and divided people. That is, until the birth of two minor scions of the House of Kholin heralded an age of change in the most warlike of the Vorin nations. Indeed, despite their humble beginnings, the brothers Dalinar and Gavilar were destined to reshape the history of not just the princedom of Kholinar or even the nation of Alethkar, but all of Russia. After the death of the Sunmaker, the Alethi people fractured back into 10 divided princedoms, which immediately turned on one another. The hatred that many nations harbored towards the Alethi continued long after the Sunmaker's death, exacerbated by the fact that later generations of Alethi came to revere the Sunmaker as a cultural hero despite his many atrocities. Because of this, and their continued belligerence with their neighbours, the Alethi developed a reputation among the other cultures of Russia as warmongers and barbarians. Of course, this is not to say that the hands of other nations remained clean. It was simply that, unlike anyone else, the Alethi specifically elevated soldiery above all other professions as the highest profession a man could pursue, considering warfare to be the defining trait of their people. With that said, while the Alethi were warlike, they were not barbarians. Other than the scriptures of the Vorin Church, the most revered document in Alethkar were the Alethi Codes of War, an ancient military treatise which beseeched bright-eyed Alethi generals to persecute their wars with discipline, dignity, honesty, and honor. However, while factors like the codes mitigated the brutality of Alethi warmongering, there was also a side to the Alethi love for battle that was far darker than anyone could have ever conceived of. While Odium and his forces were still sealed away in damnation, the Unmade continued to carry out the God of Passion's will on Russia. One Unmade who remained at large was Nurgal, also known as the Thrill. Nurgal was a mindless, incorporeal creature capable of seeping into the hearts of men and conditioning them to crave the titular thrill of violence like a drug. Ultimately, the Alethi people's love for war existed because of Nurgal's influence, for Odium had sent the Thrill to imbue the Alethi with an intergenerational addiction to combat, so that when the God of Discord escaped the bonds of honor's magic and finally returned to Russia with his Voidbringer hordes, there would be a battle-hardened army there already waiting for him and ready to receive of his passions. The only missing piece in Odium's plans to turn the Alethi people into his pawns was a champion, a brutal warlord who could bring the squabbling factions of Alethkar to heel under his boot. Soon he would have that too. "Don't you ever think about what it meant though?" Gavilar asked. "A kingdom? Something grander than yourself?" "That's foolish, Gavilar. When people fight, it's about the stuff. That's it." "Maybe," Gavilar said. "Maybe. There's something I want you to listen to. The codes of war from the old days, back when Alethkar meant something." Around 4,500 years after the last desolation, 2,000 years after the recreants, and 50 years before the beginning of the Stormlight Archive, two boys were born in the Alethi city of Kholinar. Their names were Gavilar Kholin and Dalinar Kholin. The two brothers were scions of the princely house of Kholin, albeit belonging only to a minor branch of the family. Despite their privileged pedigree, the two brothers were given few advantages in life. Having lost both their mother and father at a young age, they grew up having to fend for themselves. This rough upbringing tempered the two boys, molding the older brother Gavilar into a cunning schemer and the younger brother Dalinar into a hardened fighter. Their strengths combined, the siblings rose above their station. By the time they had become young men, Gavilar had killed several of his extended relatives and seized the throne of the Kholin princedom, his brother having supported him the entire way. One of the biggest dreamers of his age, the newly coronated Prince Gavilar, had ambitions that extended far beyond the horizons of the Kholin princedom. Gavilar's goal was to go above and beyond what the Sunmaker had achieved 500 years ago, to forge a true, united kingdom of Alethkar, one that would not collapse upon its founder's death as the Sunmaker's empire had, but would endure for 1,000 generations thereafter. While small-minded princes and greedy warlords pursued ephemeral gains such as shardblades, shardplate, and plunder, Gavilar set out to pursue an immortal legacy. Naturally, this was not a path that Gavilar would walk alone, for the ever-fierce and ever-loyal Dalinar would be there with him every step of the way. Thus, the brothers Kholin set forth on their warlike mission, descending upon the 9 other princedoms of Alethkar like a two-headed chasm fiend. Where Dalinar would be the vicious axe hound who would break the other Alethi princes on the battlefield, Gavilar would be the cunning statesman who engineered the political systems that would incorporate them into his new world order after their defeat. Although the two brothers shared the same goal, their motivations could not have been more different. While Gavilar was cold and calculating, Dalinar was hot-headed and vicious. Gavilar was a statesman who was driven by lofty goals of long-term nation-building, but Dalinar was cut from the cloth of the vicious Alethi warlords of old, desiring nothing but the glory of combat and unable to see further than the next big fight. Living deep in Dalinar's heart was a thrill for combat, a thrill that made him addicted to carnage and turned him into an unstoppable beast in battle. Indeed, the influence of the unmade Nogaul, which compelled all Alethi to revel in their violent passions, was especially strong in Dalinar. For, unbeknownst to anyone, including Dalinar himself, the younger of the 2 Kholin princes was being stoked by odium, groomed to become the Dark Champion who would lead the Void God's Voidbringer armies when the Oath Pact was broken and the true desolation came to Roshar. But that day would not come for many years yet. So for now, Dalinar's love for battle was naught more than a useful tool used by his brother to unify a kingdom. In 1139 of the Vorin calendar, when both Gavilar and Dalinar were young men in their early 20s, the conquests began. One by one, Alethi princedoms on the border of the Kholin domain fell under Kholin control. Sometimes by Gavilar's shrewd politicking, sometimes by the edge of Dalinar's sword. One of the earliest princes to swear fealty to the Kholin banner was Toril Sadius of the Sadius princedom. A sharp politician and capable general, Sadius would become a key ally to Gavilar in both the political and military battlegrounds in the wars to come. Meanwhile, Dalinar continued to build a reputation for himself as an unstoppable force of destruction. Despite the fact that he had yet to earn a Shardblade or Shardplate, Dalinar was still capable of clearing out a battlefield, losing himself in the ease of killing as he tore through entire battalions of soldiers with just himself and his small band of hand-picked elites. In one instance, while fighting through a town in the territory of one Brightlord Yazriar, Dalinar was shot through the shoulder by a great bow-wielding assassin from a ridge over 300 yards away. Undaunted by the pain, the younger Kholin prince leapt onto a horse and, with an arrow still sticking out of his shoulder, chased down the archer and ran him down, capturing him alive. Rather than execute the assassin, Dalinar instead praised the man for his excellent marksmanship, and, seeking to put those skills to use, compelled the man into his elite honor guard, in exchange for not pillaging the town they had just captured. After this legendary encounter, Dalinar became known by his infamous moniker, the Blackthorn, after the black arrow that had been sticking out of his shoulder as he chased down his would-be assassin. Not long after that incident, Dalinar became even more formidable after claiming a set of Shardplate from a rival Alethi Brightlord. Normally, warriors in Shardplate are completely invulnerable to practically any weapon, but apparently they aren't invulnerable to fall damage because Dalinar killed the man by kicking him off a cliff. Unfortunately for the Blackthorn, his endless luck on the battlefield was juxtaposed by a lack of fortune in the field of romance. Dalinar's one true love was a woman named Navani, a highborn Alethi lady from an ancient and prestigious family. These feelings were reciprocated, with Navani loving Dalinar as much as he loved her. Yet the bright lady was a politically ambitious woman who ultimately chose to prioritize affairs of state over affairs of the heart. Rather than court Dalinar, Navani instead wooed Gavilar, choosing to pursue matrimony with the brother who would be king instead of the brother she loved. The eventual marriage between Navani and Gavilar would forever be a black spot in the relationship between the Blackthorn and the Uniter of Alethkar. Yet, despite the anguish of seeing the woman he loved in the arms of his older brother, Dalinar's dogmatic loyalty to Gavilar never wavered. Navani, for her part, became an instrumental part of Gavilar's nation-building project. An exceptionally talented stateswoman and learned literati, she collaborated with other important women in the Kholin court, such as Aelai Sadius, to stabilize the territories that her husband and brother-in-law conquered. Perhaps the greatest military challenge standing between the House of Kholin and the unification of Alethkar was the city of Rathalas, known also as the Rift. Ruled by fierce Brightlord Tanalan, the Rift was a heavily protected fortress city. built into the walls of a steep canyon that protected it from high storms and provided it a verticality that made conquering it through conventional means nearly impossible. The people of the Rift were fiercely independent-minded and resolved to resist assimilation into the regime of the Kholin tyrant by any means necessary. With the Rifters rejecting all of his political overtures, Gavilar had no choice but to deploy his axe-hound, the Blackthorn, to bite the head off this beast. During the ensuing assault on Rathalas, Dalinar challenged Tanalan to single combat, a challenge the honor-bound Alethi Brightlord accepted. Tanalan was possessed of a shard blade, but no shard plate, while Dalinar possessed plate, but no blade. Their duel was a fierce one, but the thrill burned brighter in the Blackthorn than it did in the Lord of the Rift, and so Dalinar got the upper hand, mortally wounding Tanalan. Tanalan managed to retreat with the help of his men, and Dalinar pursued. When the Blackthorn caught up with his foe, he found him already dead, in the arms of his weeping widow, and protected by his son, a young boy bearing his father's shard blade. "You can't have my daddy," the boy said, words distorted by his sorrow. Pain-spren crawled around the floor. "You can't, you... His voice fell to a whisper. "Daddy said, we fight monsters, and with faith, we will win." A few hours later, Dalinar sat on the edge of the rift, his legs swinging over the broken city below. His new shard blade rested across his lap. The shard blade that Dalinar had claimed that day was named Oathbringer. All shard blades were priceless and possessed of ancient and storied pedigrees, but this one was particularly special, for it was the blade which had once belonged to Sadis the Sunmaker, the last king to have united Alethkar under one banner. Its possession granted the House of Kholin a powerful symbol of legitimacy in their own quest of unification. As for the young boy and his mother, the thrill pulsing in Dalinar's heart had subsided when he looked upon them, and he had ultimately shown them mercy and allowed them to live. This decision would later come to haunt him. A year after the subjugation of Rathalas, the conquest had slowed down. The large majority of Alethkar had been conquered by the Kholins and Gavilar, who was now properly styling himself as King of Alethkar, and had begun making arrangements for his still bachelor brother to find a suitable bride. In this, the most eligible single lady was Evi, a noblewoman from the western kingdom of Rira. She and her brother To were political refugees, having fled their homeland in possession of one of Rira's ancestral sets of shardplate, and come to Alethkar hoping to secure asylum and a political marriage into the royal Kholin family in exchange for their priceless artifact. During a feast in their honor, Dalinar made an astounding first impression on his would-be brother-in-law and bride-to-be when he thoughtlessly stepped outside into the middle of a deadly raging high storm, dodging flying boulders and massive spindly-legged storm striders in search of a knife to slice his steak with. Returning to the storm bunker where the feast was taking place empty-handed, the Blackthorn eventually found a knife in the hands of an assassin disguised as a servant, about to strike down his brother. Leaping across the table, Dalinar effortlessly slew the assassin, claimed his knife, and used it to eat his steak. Suffice to say, To agreed to betroth Evi to Dalinar shortly thereafter, confident that she would be well protected in the Blackthorn's hands. "It's like you're dead," Evi said. Dalinar looked over at her. "It's like you only live when you can fight," she continued. "When you can kill, like a blackness from old stories. You live only by taking lives from others." With that pale hair and light golden skin, she was like a glowing gemstone. She was a sweet, loving woman who deserved better than the treatment he gave her. From the beginning, the marriage between Dalinar and Evi was trouble in paradise. The Blackthorn was not a categorically bad husband, but while he learned to respect his wife, he never came to truly love her. After all, his heart still belonged to Navani, his now sister-in-law. Moreover, the gulf in personalities between the married couple was simply too vast. Evi was an empath and a pacifist who abhorred all violence on principle, regardless of reason. Dalinar, a warrior who lived for the thrill of combat, was her very antithesis. Evi experienced a ray of hope for her husband when she gave birth to her first son, who Dalinar embraced joyfully and gave the name Adolin, meaning born unto light in the Alethi tongue. Unfortunately, any hope that fatherhood might smooth out the Blackthorn's edges eroded away in the ensuing years. Without any wars to fight, Dalinar became restless. With the influence of the unmade Spren Nergal in his heart, he had become reliant on the thrill of combat like it was a drug. and without it, he coped by abusing other substances, like drugs and alcohol. Eventually, Gavilar addressed his brother's deterioration by sending him off to war once more, this time to campaign along the borders of Hadaz and Jar Kaved as a show of the new Alethi kingdom's strength against their neighbours. Dalinar and Evi grew distant during this time, so much so that the Blackthorn missed the birth of his second son, Renarin, and only met him a year after his birth when Evi brought him to the battlefront. Faced with the increasing likelihood that she might be able to enjoy a normal family life free from war and destruction, Evi grew increasingly distraught. Moved by his wife's distress, the power of the thrill abated in Dalinar's heart, and he agreed to return from the war front and settle down with her and the children in the capital of Khalinar. First, however, he had one last battle to fight. Years after the conclusion of the Wars of Unification, embers of rebellion had begun to burn among the recently subjugated High Princes of Alethkar, embers stoked by none other than Bright Lord Tanalan the Younger of Rathalas, the very same boy who Dalinar had spared all those years ago after his father, Tanalan the Older, had died by Dalinar's hand. Deployed by his kingly brother to handle the situation, the Blackthorn's first instinct was to bring the rebellious people of Rathalas to heel through fire and blood. But the temperate influence of his wife Evi, who had accompanied him on the campaign, instead compelled him to seek out a diplomatic solution first. These diplomatic overtures were surprisingly successful. Upon treating with Dalinar, the young Bright Lord Tanalan agreed not only to surrender to royal authority, but name all the other Bright Lords who had been secretly conspiring against the crown with him, under the conditions that he would be given full amnesty for his treason and would be depicted as having been secretly working for the Kholins all along. As a final olive branch, Tanalan revealed that Toril Sadeas was one of the conspirators, and gave Dalinar the location of a hidden war camp, where Sadeas was mustering his men to rise up against the crown. Thus Dalinar departed to punish Sadeas, but all was not as it seemed. It was only just as he approached the cavern that the war camp was in that Dalinar realized the trap. These men were not Sadeas's, but Tanalan's. The rebels triggered a landslide that killed off all of Dalinar's men. Yet despite being buried under a mountain of boulders, the Blackthorn survived, managing to crawl back out through sheer force of will, and the raging power of the thrill now burning inside him. I intend to so thoroughly ruin this place that for 10 generations nobody will dare build here for fear of the spirits who will haunt it. We will make a pyre of this city, and there shall be no weeping for its passing, for none will remain to weep. Limping back to the Kholin war camps after his ordeal, the Blackthorn saw only red. His orders to his men were simple and chilling: death to Rathalas, death to the men, death to the women, and death to the children. As royal soulcasters began transmuting stone into oil to put the rift to the torch, Dalinar was beset one last time by his wife, who pleaded with him not to go through with this indiscriminate massacre. Still enraged, the Blackthorn brushed her off. Shortly after, Evi disappeared from the war camp under mysterious circumstances. Paying the mother of his children no mind, Dalinar set to his genocidal path. Screams below, then cries of pain, calls for mercy. People flooded from buildings, shouting in terror, fleeing on walkways and steps towards the basin below. Many buildings burned, trapping others inside. The rift behind him was becoming a pit of darkness and fire. In the midst of the inferno, the Blackthorn spotted Bright Lord Tanalan struggling in desperate vain to rescue his burning people, and had him pulled out from the rift. Tanalan prostrated himself before Dalinar, begging and pleading for the lives of his family to be spared, only to be informed they were already dead. The Bright Lord fell into despair, and yet that despair suddenly twisted into malicious, hateful glee when he realized the truth, realized what his enemy had cost himself that night. Tanalan blinked, then started laughing with a frantic, crazed air. "You don't know? How could you not know? But you killed our messengers, you poor fool! You poor stupid fool!" Dalinar seized him by the chin, though the man was still held by his soldiers. "What?" "She came to us," Tanalan said, "to plead. How could you have missed her? Do you keep track of your own family so poorly?" In our next episode on the Stormlight Archive, we will edge closer to the beginning of the events of the book series. The bloody Blackthorn will struggle to cope with the reality of what he has done, and new characters will be introduced, such as the dark-eyed son of a surgeon who wants nothing more than to be a soldier, the light-eyed daughter of an abusive tyrant who wishes only to protect her family, and a mad king who asked for all the answers and, to his dismay, received them. Finally, King Gavilar, having achieved his goal of uniting Alethkar, will turn towards bigger, even loftier ambitions, and in doing so, seal his ultimate fate. To make sure you don't miss any of the exciting action to come, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.